everyone, welcome to yet another Kitabi Live. Today we'll be interviewing on Vijay Diwas. We'll be interviewing Lieutenant General Satish Dua, the author of India's Bravehearts. If you don't know about him, let me just give you a very brief idea about his extraordinary career in the Indian Army. He's been, let's say, the thing that might appeal the max to most of you would be the fact that he was the person who strategized the infamous surgical strikes of 2016. But apart from that, he's had an illustrious career in the military. So for a very long time in Kashmir and along the LOC. And yeah, it's my pleasure and honest honor to host him today on Kitabi Live. Today's live is in association with Juggernaut, who's also the publisher of India's Bravehearts, which serves as a memoir of sorts written by Lieutenant General Satish Dua. Right? And as a special treat, just before the general joins us, if you have any questions or queries, you can drop them in the question box that's mentioned here, and you can drop them in the comments below, so that if at all we can find some time while talking to the Lieutenant General, we can ask him those questions. He'll be joining in within a few minutes. In the meantime, let me tell you why we're doing this today. The book came out about sometime last week. And today is Vijay Diwas, which in fact is the 50th anniversary of Vijay Diwas. Vijay Diwas, that is 16 December, is celebrated to commemorate 16 December 1971, when we won the war against Pakistan, which led to the liberation of the East Pakistan, which is now called Bangladesh. And it was a monumental victory for India and is remembered by Indian Army and the nation for years to come, and will always be remembered. I'm just waiting for the Lieutenant General to join in. If you have any questions or queries you wish for me to ask to Lieutenant General Satish Dua, you can please mention them in the comments or in the question box right now, so that we can pass them on. Yeah, and a lot of you are joining in. We're waiting for the Lieutenant General to come on. Right. And let me just tell you a bit about my experience while reading this book, because I went in thinking that this is going to be largely just about the most famous thing that he's done, while it wasn't. That was just the first chapter. And honestly, the more I read about this man and his life in the army, or his entire experience in the Indian Army, each and every sentence was riveting for me, because it added so many more dimensions, and I can't wait to talk to him. And I think so is here. So just wait. Good afternoon, sir.
Hi, good afternoon.
Welcome to Kitabi Karwan, sir. It's an honor to be having this conversation with you on Vijay Diwas, sir.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and connect with you and the other youth.
Right. So the first question is going to be slightly on the lighter side of things. I've read a lot about you on Wikipedia and through the book, and learned a lot about your life. But could you just tell us one quick thing about you, which most of us might not know through a quick search on the internet? What our viewers might not know about you or your life in the
army? Okay, maybe everyone may not know that I initially started off my career by trying to become a doctor.
Oh.
And I took admission in MBBS first year in Karnataka, in Government Medical Bellary. But I was very kicked to join the National Defense Academy. And then about 6 months later, when I got a call letter and call to join the National Defense Academy, I jumped at it, persuaded my parents, and changed track. I have never regretted it. I don't know how good a doctor I would have been, but I've never ever regretted being a soldier.
Okay, I'm sure of that, sir. And that actually just drives me right back to one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about. I must admit, when I first heard about it, I was quite excited to read about the surgical strikes and what the strategy was that went into it. But the more I read your book, I realized there's so many more dimensions to a life in the army than a civilian can actually imagine. And one of them is the one which you just mentioned, how you convinced your parents to join the army, or where the motivation comes from to join the army in the very first place, about how you wish to be there for your boys. So what was the driving factor for you to join the army, or was there an incident that inspired you, or maybe was this just a drive since childhood? What was?
So there are two or three things I'd like to mention in that regard. First,
Right, sir.
I am an Air Force brat. My father is in Air Force, so I grew up in Air Force camps.
Right.
Second, whenever in our school, I studied in the AFCS, Air Force Central School in Subroto Park, Delhi, where whenever alumni returned, a couple of them returned from NDA and they spoke about the training in NDA, and that also inspired me to join the armed forces. But the most defining moment was somebody gave me a book, and I read this book. I will recommend this to anyone in that stage of life, especially. It's called Reach for the Sky. It is a story of Douglas Bader. He was a daredevil Royal Air Force pilot in England. In an accident, he lost one of his legs. After that, with an artificial leg, he managed to get back into flying, and he started flying. In another accident, he lost another leg. And thereafter, with two artificial legs, he got back into flying because those were the days of the World War II. They needed more pilots. He was an ace pilot, and he proved his skills. He carried out many daredevil sorties, and then eventually was shot down. His aircraft was shot down over Germany. He was taken as prisoner of war. As a prisoner of war, he, with two artificial legs, he would run away from every prison they put him into. And so much so, they had to actually remove his legs at night. And the last sentence on this, guess what he did? And Schloss Alberg is the highest high security prison in Germany those days, camp. It is on top of a hill, and there is a moat surrounding that little castle. He built a glider with wooden boards and potato glue, and he took off in that glider across the moat into the other side. He was caught a few miles, but that's the spirit that inspired me to join the armed forces.
Oh, that's a fascinating tale, and I'm sure everyone who's viewing this right now is in the same reaction as I am. But so that actually also makes me wonder about something that you mentioned. You mentioned that it's this free-flowing spirit, this passion that comes from within, which drives people towards the army. And given that you served a lot of your career in Kashmir or along the LOC, which also, as you mentioned in your books, called LC in army parlance, I'm sure that it's a high pressure job to the extent that there's a lot of passion and there's a lot of emotion involved, along with the logical thinking side of things. As you mentioned while writing about the surgical strikes, that there is this vengeance or this desire to act in a particular way, which is also sometimes to be countermanded by logic or say further dictats like diplomacy, etc. So how does this exactly work in the senior levels of the army? How does this strategizing process actually go about, where you have to balance these two equations, or about sending a message or being in high pressure zones?
When we are in senior positions, it always helps that if we have had exposure in such operations at junior levels. And that's why the commanders who are picked to be at higher positions are those who had some experience on the line of control in counter-terrorism operations, because these operations that Pakistan is now setting out by the means of proxy war, use of terrorists, requires a very different kind of handling than the conventional war, for which all soldiers are trained right from the academy days. I mean, that's our conventional training, that's our bread and butter, and we need to train for that. Okay. But having said that, we are also embroiled in counter-terrorism as of last several decades. In the Northeast, it is lesser now in the Northeast, but it used to be very violent in my younger days. Then in Sri Lanka, our army has had a lot of exposure experience in Sri Lanka for 2 years. And as you all are aware now, because at the contemporary moment, Jammu and Kashmir is a live example for last over 3 decades now. When it comes to balancing at higher levels, you realize how much you must, I beg your pardon, one appreciates how much you must put into counter-terrorism operations, that is kinetic operations per se, how much we require to get into information warfare and perception building, because today's world, it's the story of narratives. It is the use of social media is rampant. And such enablers, technological enablers, which today every young person connects with, those have to be utilized well in a manner that you exploit these enablers to further your own goals. And on the other hand, you also have to synergize with other agencies. When I say other agencies, it could also mean security forces like the police, CRPF, and so on. It also means intelligence agencies, because you really need to work out a good intelligence network to be able to act. It also means the diplomatic card has to be played where it is required at a higher level, because all instruments of national power have to be leveraged. So a proxy war requires this a little more than the others, because it is not a short war that will last over a couple of weeks or months. It is a prolonged war which is continuous, and it's very difficult to identify the friend from foe, because enemy is not wearing a different uniform across the border. The enemy is within. He lives in the same villages, same houses, and the same jungle. So you ferreting him out, finding him, ferreting him out, and then dealing with him is very difficult and requires a very different kind of operation.
So something I have actually a two-part question, which is the only question I'm going to ask you about the surgical strike, because I want to talk to you about a lot of other things. The first one is that something that you mentioned, the use of social media or other forms of interaction out there. Was this something that played a role at all while strategizing for the surgical strikes, given that there is so much giveaway of things? Like, for example, someone could be tweeting about what's happening along the LOC, or someone could just mention that they heard about like a rumor about something like this happening. So was this a part of the strategizing effort for the surgical strike? And so the second thing which I wish to ask you is, so given that that's something that you mentioned in the first chapter while talking about this, that earlier, it's not that we haven't carried out such operations earlier, but this time around we decide to be bold about it and proclaim it to the world that yes, we did this. Was this change in strategy or this change in attitude, was it at all ever hampered by the fact that there is a nuclear nation that we're doing this with, or what would possibly be the rebuttal consequences? Could this blow into a full-fledged war? How was, I mean, just to put it in poker terms, how did you hedge your cards on this entire issue?
Okay, the first part, talking about use of social media. When I spoke about use of social media or cyber warfare, I was talking about counter-terrorism operations, whether on the line of control, in the valley, in the hinterland, as we call it.
Yeah.
As far as surgical strikes are concerned, it was a one-night operation. It was specifically going across the LOC, striking at the terror camps and returning, with an aim to destroy the terrorist infrastructure and network there. In this, there was no question of anyone, let's say, like you use the sentence, tweeting about it. Maybe you are inspired by what happened in Osama's raid in Pakistan. But that was a chance. By chance, somebody was tweeting about it. However, in this, there was no such chance, because we had kept it such a closely guarded secret. And I've written somewhere in the book that we didn't even give it a name.
Yes.
Operation, we didn't even give it a name, so that people don't get comfortable about the fact that, oh, we've given it a shroud of secrecy. And it was purely on need-to-know basis. So, a lot of soldiers and commanders who were not involved, but who were deployed on ground, did not know about it till after it had been launched. So let alone anybody else coming to know. So that I'm very clear that we were not There was no sort of threat of social media somehow giving the game away. And in your second part, if I remember correct me if I'm wrong. I think you're asking me as to how did we manage this operation itself vis-a-vis the other enablers. Is it? Please repeat your question.
Right. So essentially, my question was, how did you manage or hedge your risk, given the fact that it could have very well blown into a full-fledged war against a very hostile nation which possesses nuclear weapons? What was the strategizing that went behind deciding that this is worth the risk reward?
When this happened, as you can read in the book, the defense minister landed up the day Uri took place. The army chief was the Northern Army commander, who's my boss when I was the co-commander in Kashmir. The Northern Army commander, who looked at the whole of J&K, was there. Now, theirs is a level higher than mine, and everything was taken into account. Obviously, I cannot discuss those things in the interest of security, but suffice it to say that everything was taken into account. When you do a thing like this, when you do a surgical strike, when you do a Balakot, you have to be prepared for all types of consequences. It can be a small skirmish, the retaliation from the other side. It can be a conflict, it can be a large-scale war, and to be able to plan for this, we had to cater for everything. When you say cater, you are looking at mobilization of forces, you're looking at adequacy of ammunition, other critical supplies for maybe a 10, 15, 20, 30-day war. So the point I'm trying to make is that level was that of the army chief, the army commanders, the leadership in the country had taken charge. A couple of days ago, I read in the newspapers that the armed forces have been now authorized to buy 15 days worth of warfighting, worth of ammunition by themselves. Right. It is 15 days now. It was after the Uri operations that army was entitled by itself to buy 10 days. And now it has been enhanced to 15 days. So that was the kind of preparation that went into that kind of a possible retaliation. And only then we could do that. So that is why the decisions had to be taken at the highest level. It was not just an operation that went in there. True, it was an operation that went in there. Right. It could have very serious ramifications in which all of us, all you and your viewers, our viewers included, everybody would have been involved, because if it is a war, the whole nation is at war.
Right. So I just have a last couple of questions for you. So one thing that I felt while reading your book is that there are a lot of emotional human moments, human interaction moments that comes in a soldier's life. For example, in conveying information, the news of a colleague's death, or like the example of you gave about that woman in a village which was near your battalion who was being exploited, and then the army helped her out. Or for that matter, the stone pelters that you faced in Kashmir, where you are serving the people, but sometimes those very people are the ones hurting you. So are there any particular steps that senior leadership takes to account for the emotional health or well-being of the junior soldiers? Because this could be a huge taxing thing on soldiers who are younger, who are 20 years, 23 years, who barely into their lives and seeing these things for the first
time. Till very recently, we did not have any institutional mechanism for training on these sorts. But there was a lot of on-job training. Everyone learned in the setup of your own battalion, your company, and your own verticals. You learned from your seniors. Your seniors mentored you how to do such things by experience. The advantage on that front perhaps was that we have been in operations, wars, and counter-terrorism situations for decades. So there was always a pool of very senior, you always had seniors who would have been in some war or operations. Like when I was commissioned, I grew up amongst those heroes in my unit who took part in the 71 war, of which the Vijay Diwas we are celebrating today. So you learned from them, whether it's JP officers. that was one part. It wasn't like any other Western army where you suddenly train for some time and you just go for a couple of years in the Middle East or some other country, you're deployed and you come back, and they have very different family values and community values.
Right,
Our
of
systems,
course.
our country are very different. We find strength in our family and community values, and that's what takes us through. However, like I said in the beginning, of late, there is a recognition that we also need to have some institutionalized way of training, and also, in fact, looking into post-traumatic stress disorder amongst
Right,
some of those who may be afflicted by prolonged deployment in very harsh climatic areas, or in prolonged deployment in such tough areas or tough situations and tough operations. One of my
right,
stories talks about a man in my unit who wanted to commit suicide at one point of time and how I dealt with him.
right.
But such are the cases which where you need to where you need to get into a little institutionalized help, and now our army is looking at it.
Right, sir. So just to end this live chat, I want to ask you a very light question. So now that you're retired, how's life for you? What are you pursuing now? What are these? Are there any hobbies that you pursue? What's life for someone as decorated as you post retirement?
It's a normal life. Decorated is not, but I'm very happy to. I am very fond of adventure sports. I do horse riding regularly. I've got
All
two
right.
motorbikes. I go on bike rides, which some of you who are following me on social media do get a dose of it whenever I've just returned from Ladakh, a month and a half ago, where I did some cycling on motorplanes and a motorbike ride, and so I went over some new roads in Zanskar Valley. I'm fond of doing such things. I write articles in newspapers, magazines. I do a lot of youth engagement.
Right.
Which is nowadays happening more online, but before the lockdown, I used to, I've given talks in many colleges and universities.
Yes.
Connecting with youth is a passion for me, because I feel you are the leaders of tomorrow, and you are going to drive the growth story of India. Not everyone has to join the army
Right, sir.
to serve. You can just be a good citizen, and we need everyone. So I am very fond of doing these things, and of course now I'll perhaps start adding one more thing. I'll maybe I'll write another book and another.
Oh, that's something all of us are really looking forward to, and so we are very thankful for having mentors like you who are actually taking time to engage with us, because I think that's a very important part where the ones with experience voluntarily engage with the youth so that the experience passes on. So just one passing final comment before I let you go, sir. What if I would ask you to give a message to the youth today on Vijay Diwas? What would it be coming from you, sir?
Uh, you, and now I'm addressing the youth. You are the leaders of tomorrow. You are going to take this country forward. You are going to take the world forward. And remember, we need every one of you. You need not be a soldier. Everyone need not become a soldier. We need every one of you. The growth story of India is going to be driven by the software guys, the industrialists, the corporate guys, doctors, engineers, what have you. Everyone is required for the growth story of our country. So, if you want to be a soldier or join the army, you're most welcome. But at the expense of reputation, let me say, you don't have to be a soldier to serve the country. Do the best you can in whichever field you are, and be a good citizen. If you want to respect a soldier, be a good citizen. Be a citizen worth dying for. Jai Hind.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a lovely message, and thank you for joining us for this chat today. Uh, that's everyone. That's it from our side. Sir's book, India's Bravehearts, is now out. It's available on Amazon and Flipkart and all other major e-commerce services. You can check them out. It's been published by Juggernaut. Thank you so much for joining in today, sir, and having this lovely chat with us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind, sir.